In this section of notes on Chapter 6, we're going to take a look at different types of body movements that are controlled by your muscles. We know that muscles are going to be attached at two different points, and this can either be attached to bone or other connective tissue like tendons. And basically, when we're looking at these muscle attachments, one point is going to be the origin, and the other one is the insertion. The origin is going to be the attached muscle to the immovable bone or the least movable bone. And the insertion point is going to be where this muscle attaches to the movable bone. So if we're taking a look here at your biceps brachii, the origin, our least movable bone up here, is going to be attached at the top of our humerus and our clavicle here. And the insertion, the more movable bone, we see it's going to be attached to your radius. So we see muscle movement is going to occur when we see this muscle starts to contract. When the muscle contracts, the insertion is going to move towards the origin. And this type of movement is going to depend on the type of joint that we have between these bones. The first type of movement that we can talk about is flexion. And if we are flexing a muscle, we are going to be decreasing the angle of the joint, aka it's going to bring two bones closer together. So if we are looking here at this diagram, when we are standing in anatomical position, to flex your arm, we are going to decrease the angle of the joint and we're going to raise it. Same thing here for looking at flexing the knee. We're going to bend our leg backwards. So we're going to decrease the angle of the joint. Opposite of flexion is extension, and it really helps to kind of learn these movements in pairs because they're going to be opposite of one another. So if flexion is going to decrease the angle, extension is going to increase the angle. And if we extend our joint greater than 180 degrees, we can call this hyperextension. An example here would be then pointing your chin towards the ceiling. You are hyperextending your neck. So flexion, we're going to decrease the angle. Extension, increase the angle. Another type of movement we can see is rotation, and this is going to move our bones along the longitudinal axis. So if we were looking at shaking our head, no, we are rotating our bone on the axis vertebrae. If we're looking at rotating our limbs towards the side, we can call this lateral rotation. Or if we're looking at rotating our limbs towards the midline, we'll call this medial rotation. Abduction, so standing in anatomical position, this is when we are going to move our limb away from the midline. We can see abduction, raising our arm or fanning our fingers and our toes. Opposite of abduction is adduction. And this is going to then move our limb back towards the midline or back towards anatomical position, or putting our fingers from spread out back to just relax and next to one another. So abduction, abduction away, ad or adduction towards. Another special type of movement here is called circumduction, and this is going to be a combination of different movements here, but we see that we are going to rotate our limbs in a circle. The proximal end is going to stay stationary, it's going to be the pivot point, and then the distal end is going to obviously move in a circle. So circumduction. Some special types of movements that we can see with the feet here. Dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion is when we are going to lift our foot and we see that our superior surface is going to point our toes towards the shin. Dorsiflexion, raising your toes. Plantar flexion is opposite of this. We're going to depress the foot and we're going to point our toes down. plantar flexion. We also can look at inversion and eversion. Inversion is when we are going to point our toes towards the midline or medially, and then opposite of that, eversion, we're going to point our toes out laterally to the sides. Inversion towards the middle, eversion lateral towards the side. If we're looking at some different movements that we can see within the hand, we have supination, and this is where we are going to rotate so our palms face anteriorly or up. This is a special type of movement when the radius and the ulna are going to rotate around one another. And you can think about it as you are trying to have someone put some soup in your hand, you show them your palms. So supination, palms face up. Pronation is the opposite of supination, and we see that we're going to then turn so our palms face down. Again, the radius and the ulna are going to rotate around one another. Pronation. Opposition, this is when we see your thumb is going to move to touch your fingertips. So if you're trying to do the Girl Scout sign and have your pinky touch your thumb, we are using the movement of opposition. And those are all the movements that we have in this video.